How's it going, dickheads? This is Synoptic and we're gonna get it on. The game is Napoleon Total War on the map Galician Ria, 2 versus 2 Ottoman Empire and Austria versus France and Russia. I play as the Ottomans in the bottom right, Blonkers plays as Austria in the bottom left, and we're not going to go through the opponents' names because I don't feel like humiliating some children today. Maybe next week. So in terms of armies, I've actually put up a little treat for you guys. I spent a lot of time into making a couple of pictures just to depict what the armies are, so enjoy. You know, I probably could have done that whole army setup list a little better, you know, with the transitions and the music and make it all flashy and pretty, but I can't because I'm not gay. And first contact goes to France, who catches me off guard very well. It's a bit discerning when you see that many cav go up the hill. He pulls all of them back episode 1, which goes directly for my forward baseline cavalry. Basically you just have your cavalry there before your line approach, and he caught me off guard. Very good move to him. And in terms of commentating this video, I'm going to focus on one side at a time because both battles take place at the exact same moment. This is an entry level to Austria versus Russia, and I'll go back to that later on, but this is the major turning point, so when you see this part you'll know at what time frame it begins, because this section will start at maybe 8 minutes of the video, but it's actually right in time when I continue my fight. But I'll go through it now anyway. Blonkers just charges the unicorns, and if you know unicorns, they are probably the strongest artillery piece in the whole game. And I think if you watch other videos of mine, Blonkers does like to go directly for those artillery pieces with hero cavalry. Now this is back to my side. After that initial disruption on my cavalry, France is able to just push with everything he has with his cavalry superiority, 4 squares, and he's actually going to punch right through and assault my single artillery piece in the middle. You're seeing me with the attack clicks, all the red lines. I'm going to do my best to shoot the cavalry. However, cavalry are very fast and units take a very long time to turn and shoot, and I probably could have reinforced that better or foreseen it, but instead I start my own counter-attack. I have a Bashi Bazook on the left side, and I'm hitting the wing of the approaching French army, and that's a Swiss foot, and it's also downhill. The main reason why I charged that area was because if he did stop and shoot, he'd just shoot into the land itself, so that was pretty much a win-win scenario, and I take down that Swiss foot quite fast, in fact much faster than I expected. So here is the aftermath of the cav approach in my mid. You see the cav just slowly dying now in that sector, but he does take out my artillery. Now, in retaliation, my opponent notices my Bashi Bazook there and he charges them with the cavalry. Now, notice how the cavalries have all stopped. Their cavalry charge bonus is now ended, and now they're entering the melee with the Bashi Bazook, and that's not what you really want. You want to hit them in the back and shoot them. Do not fight them. Even with cavalry, the Bashis will do quite well. Okay, so that was the opening battle there. What has happened? 3 cavalry was sent down to harass my left side 4 squares, to which he pushed up that side for immediate line fire. The same cavalry was sent down to the mid and in an attempt to kill my artillery. Now that proved successful, but at what cost? He lost 3 cavalry. Almost immediately you did see the attack clicks with all my forces there, cavalry and line infantry as well as light infantry. All that fire will kill a cav super fast. At the same time he tried to conduct another assault on my left side with a further 2 cavalry. At this moment I had already conducted my own counterattack with a Bashi Bazook. That was highly successful, mainly because it took out 1 infantry on its own and then occupied the 2 cavalry. We saw the cavalry just go straight into his own men, and without the charge bonus the cavalry would have a further hard time taking down the Bashis. Now this is the right side of my army, and my opponent consists of old guards and militia, so that is not one area which I wish to fight in. Earlier on we saw another slight harassment with my light infantry, and he slowly but surely just started running at me to close in the gap. And even with the woodland advantage, those old guard will tear through me, so I am forced to keep retreating. And of course this is considered kiting, but that's 2 line infantry, 2 light infantry versus 3 old guard and 2 militia or something. And that's, I don't really care, I'm not shooting that, because they will annihilate you. And whenever you see elite infantry, either just avoid them or try and take them out as fast as you can. In this case, I am definitely avoiding him, while I can try and get a foothold on the other side of the army. So, in the mid there and left, I did hold his attack. I eliminated most of the cavalry, and he is forced to retreat. And what happens here is he keeps trying to curl around. He wants that woodland for himself, so he occupies it, which is on an angle towards my army, and then I angle back, which allows me to do a little counter cav charge into his infantry there, because there is simply no cavalry support at this point. He's been very aggressive with his cavalry, attaining massive losses, although creating losses for myself as well. Now it also helps a ton if you pay attention to the map. Now this goes for in-game and watching any videos on YouTube. It's quite informative. Now I did explain my actions throughout the battle. Now my opponent did multi-pronged assaults, to which I reacted by either holding my ground and counter-attacking, or simply falling back. Now, it just depends on what you're up against. I did state that my opponent had stronger units on the right, which I didn't want to fight yet, and I did hold on the left side, which I counterattacked with. Now this was a more simple attack here. Earlier you saw my pretty simple cav charge through the woodland. I pushed that same cavalry through the woods, then I conducted another melee charge on a lone militia unit, I think, and then swung that cav around and hit it hammer and anvil style. And that's a pretty fast way to take down any unit, mainly because any unit in melee, or line of infantry in melee, can't square. And my opponent was also very quick to counteract this. He saw my cavalry there, and he was pretty much just going to reinforce that area for his militia, but they already routed. So, in turn, he just attacks me, and now he's going to use that same army force to do similar to what I did just then, and just swing it around and attack somewhere else straight away. Now this is the force that I was falling back earlier, and now it is completely isolated up against the old guards. And now that's a shot there, because as I did say, I held my ground and counterattack down the mid, and that in effect pushed his mid back. So not only is he isolating me, I'm partially isolating him as well. Coinciding with that cavalry strike, he's able to clamp down my forces on the right side. With those 2 line infantry forcing squares, he's able to push up his infantry quick smart. Now I'm pushing up my mid to reinforce the area, mainly because considering straight lines, I am much closer to this area than my opponent is in terms of reinforcement. I did say his mid was pushed back, and you can see for yourself how far he is from the general area. I have my cavalry in the vicinity, and again I'm going to specifically target the militia. Low morale and no square ability. You can see his other units forming squares, and you see how fast the units will rout considering the state of the fight. Following that cav charge on the militia, the events there mirror what happened to me. His units there are clamped down, and he is the one forced to reinforce. Now this time I am able to form a defense in the given area and shoot 5 volleys into his line before they can set up a strong force of their own. And that basically wraps it up on my side. So I did discuss why I was pushing back the right, and I'll discuss further into why I held the middle. I took a house in the middle area, and that's always very difficult for an opponent to retake or harass if they don't have any round shot units or artillery. Now coupling that with militia harass with my cavalry in the mid, along with the successful melee charge and unsuccessful charges from my opponent, that was enough reason for me to stay in that given area and fight back. And with that ending, now we turn back in time to maybe the 3rd minute or so, just after the Lancer attack from Blonkers, effectively taking out the 2 20-pounder unicorns. Now in reaction, Russia did send off their own contingent to protect the area, as well as assault Blonkers' little force backing up the cavalry in the event that the cavalry were unsuccessful. Okay, so early opening phase, there is the artillery takedown. What did that cause? Two contingents from both armies duking it out on the mid-right side, and an event that leaves the main armies of both armies far behind the fight in the front. And what that leaves is a lot of cavalry fights, because they're obviously the fastest unit, and they'll be the first unit to reinforce the fights there. And it just comes down to who's better with the cavalry. Russia is a bit more aggressive, a bit more greedy. In fact, he's trying to force squares wherever he can and dish as much damage as possible. However, there's simply no infantry available to take advantage over the squares, and in effect this leaves the general area very vulnerable to counterattack from Blancas with his own cavalry. Now, because of the fact that the two armies are duking it out with small armies, a major factor in winning this fight, it comes down to who's better at reinforcing and who's better at getting the main army up and running. In which this case, Austria is faster to get the main army up to this contingent force here. You can see with just the basic distances, the whole force of Austria is already in that vicinity, whereas Russia is quite reluctant to move up. And without further reinforcement, the Russian forces are eventually being split up into two contingents here, with the dwindled frontal army and the defensive army held backwards. So from the early movements, it becomes quite apparent that Russia was relying heavily on the artillery, and when they were swiftly taken down, there wasn't much reaction or adaptation to that event. Unicorns are very expensive and very powerful, however they must be protected at all times. When you usually see someone playing as Russia, they're gonna be using unicorns, unless it's of course banned in the rules. In our games we don't usually ban them, because at this point I do believe that they're balanced, depending on the map. So when Russia did realize he lost the artillery, he then moved some forces out to fight back, attempt to counter. However, there was no further reinforcement, which then led up to the splitting up of his forces, which rendered both sides obviously weaker as Austria continued to move against Russia on a united front. So what are we seeing here? It's essentially just exploiting your opponent's weaknesses and working towards your own. Austria has no artillery, so he has all the mobility in the world compared to his opponent, whereas Russia has virtually none. He had to move at the speed of his artillery, and in effect his placement wasn't too perfect in that time. That's not to say that he wouldn't have protected it the whole game. It was just that single moment where his artillery was vulnerable, and then Blancas took it with his cavalry. And that's all it really takes in this game, just a couple seconds of being vulnerable, and then you can lose the initiative and you can lose the fight. And then following that, there's just the basic, don't get your cavalry killed, don't use your cavalry to force squares unless you have infantry to exploit the square. And then following through reinforcements, just keep your men reinforced, essentially. It's just that simple. If you don't, then they're going to die. Your opponent's going to exploit that. They're going to surround you and kill that force and then move on to the next. So yes, it has been about 2 months since my last video, although a lot of change has happened to me lately. I think a month ago I was in a pretty bad accident, and I severed 2 of my fingers, which is pretty gross, but they've grown back because I'm a mutant, and I was also undergoing a new job, a career change, so that occupied a lot of my time. And right now there is a huge heat wave and I'm really uncomfortable, but I'm doing this anyway, and should be doing a few more. I'm looking forward to Shogun 2, and it should be good. So hope you all enjoy that. Good game to the players. Thanks for watching.